Some say that we must read each other's dreams, babayaros, y babayarosi. By the way, I donated for humanity. If you call someone babayos, in other words, that's that's emphatic. It means they're using a system tactically ulterior from nature's, which everyone has been using. In other words, everyone is only capable of speaking bajos and pretending other, and or using all exceptions, exception nature, tactical ulterior from how nature uses exception, exception nature. And the breaching method shows them they have to hide that. Having done that, while they're doing it, and shown they have to do it to come too, for reasons to come. So in other words, there are proofs. There's an organized crime method slash S worse than war crimes at countries A through Z. There is the scientific value of a breaching method, but bringing it up forces equality and reveals a quality of fact-keeping nature that rolls at countries A through Z of integrity, of sciences, of religious differences, things like that. They can't afford to have this difference discern nature's body to the extent we could discern. For example, generating two sexes, two eyes between species bodies, generating individual species bodies made up of a whole bunch of individual bodies, and differences like that. For example, to show us that it's generated, its body generating it. The hyper invisible, but still discernible, so to speak. There are proofs that the ancients referred to it this way. One of the reasons is one of the proofs is that it's more probable and practical. You guys have only heard definitions of history that have the phrase criminally foreign influenced databases left out. And black people's rights of eyes. You have that left out and replaced with nature communicates with it and what James Madison declassified to be communicated for it. Judge Napolitano has a Scott Ritter. Oh, here's the challenge. What's this about? By James Madison. He wants to go back and forth, a debate about James Madison, where people are using the word of the law and the nature of the law out of sequence, which is also nature. In other words, James Madison declassified. He did not have free speech. You don't vote on slavery. They had to leave slavery entrenched northern colonies, southern colonies, right through the Civil War. They had to stay rules with slavery, north and south, because if they lost, they were going to, the breaching method, there was a whole bunch of people, everyone was only allowed to have roles with it. Everyone was enslaved. In fact, chief nature-wise, therefore physically, our founders. You guys have our founders framed. James Madison and there were plural unknown named founders. They had to force everyone to be a part of the Declaration of Independence, even though it was against the law and the rules. They had to leave it that a whole bunch of them against all women, against Native Americans, against black people's rights of eyes. All right, you guys can't even be honest with the nature of the debate. You guys pretend to yourselves and to others too. Anyone spoke for American history properly. James Madison declassified why and how. Even once he was then a president slash chief, also he still didn't have free speech. Someone must teach and see president slash chief that way. But as incapable, in other words, incompatible volumes, except for the way they are human species body of individual body, all group differences by its way, or it demonstrates negative value, nature progressions, action natures, that nature has been demonstrating. The breaching method designed the suburbs. Even though it was built through us, they wanted to build better and safer while they were being tortured. In fact, chief nature extorted and enslaved, therefore physically. Only allowed roles with slavery, northern colony, southern colony. Everyone spying on each other for the other, in other words. Everyone trying to come out of it, you can be the nature of independence or a nature of a unity, let alone them both together and appreciating the hyper simultaneous. This is what programming is about. Since before Judge Napolitano left Fox News, he has collusions of people from my campuses with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, with various natures of federal criminals, next to Fox Connecticut News in Hartford, Connecticut, and their roles with digital crimes and whiting forensics through time, increasingly with the same house/S and ones tied to them. In other words, I never saw a Perone family members on a street, on a campus in my life. I only know they put fake ties, fake nature ties to me, do little tricks with people tied to them who plant evidences years apart. And with people that do it in databases tied to them at campuses, I also never had conversations with. Most of them I didn't even have classes with. And Anthony Agman is increasingly involved with foreign and domestic medical offenders. But these are roles with natures and methods of organized crimes and databases that are fluent through our countries. Now they are incapable, and this is from since before computers. This is about how the breaching method uses databases in relativity/S. Who denies that having black pupils whites of eyes? Having the same color eyes, different color eyes at the same time is about relativity, is going to have inherent to, active to, and progressive to their logic, their nature of logic, demonstration/S of the same thing. The only reason this hasn't surfaced is because the campuses have been stayed roles with abuses of you at each age of fact-cheating nature multi-front. You have never heard, in other words, you have only been allowed to hear other things, others or selves blamed tactically wrongly. Until it was correct. And even then and now, those truths are used for lies. All rise. All raise/rise. Is we should replace all rise, or we should amend to it all raise/rise in that sequence. Why? Because we must rise before we raise. We must be risen. In other words, humanity is unlike the other species. Longer we have to take. Because we are right where and how nature's difference becomes evolution's fruits, gifts, means out of nowhere through us, or Earth's a special difference leaves from here through us, as force space nature transfer, as Leith of Hadith was more probably and demonstrably having been defined by the ancients, who were led by how nature shows us it is functional, where its own identity is hyper invisible but still discernible, distinctly from how it is invisible but still discernible. For example, as the parts of speech of English grammar. And as the hyper invisible but still discernible, for example, as the body we are discerning. That is why and how the present participle and past participle are names hyper additional for the verb, like a gerund, like a predicate. But know how there were only two participles, and they are time oriented, but not one with the future. Know how the future in the active now, you have an extent of awareness of the future, the seasons. You are shown to an extent nature's identity of forever nature. In the future, that's already here before it even comes. To an extent you're shown you don't know. To an extent you know the past is connected here to to an extent of the past was true always. To an extent now, you know. To the extent now you don't know about, the extent in the past you don't know about. The hyper simultaneous is there too. Needs to discern the distinct part of that simultaneous nature that nature is. But it is, again, itself, as the invisible but still discernible, has a distinct identity of relationship to itself. Non-distinctly too, but distinct from how it is hyper invisible but still discernible. And it shows us this. It is functional. If we have a username for a God, that's hyper addition. That's about to teach about this. But when we're using a name for God, we're speaking about the hyper invisible. We're speaking about the invisible but still discernible. We're speaking about See, this is how the ancients taught this. Before the sciences became criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions wrought, force check, persuaded more and more incapable to afford to have heard, let alone discerned, even by the names of the people of the sciences. Short words properly by the identity the sciences share. Like, for example, relativity. Nature shows us that its identity is greater, simultaneously greater than, and more finite than any of the individual sciences individually grouped and together as their own identity, but as a semi-nature relationship to its own. I forgot what I entitled this video. No, Judge Napolitano and judging freedom. So, in other words, these are also people with behavior racketeering, worse than war crimes. They're retired and standing. The best of them to the worst. They're really sick judges, including the best of them that our founders told us to understand. At the same time, as the difference of guilt, there were many countries, sick countries, want to hurt us because they were already entrenched here. Before America's founders were born, there were only permitted collusion slash S against all women, against Native Americans, against black peoples, whites and whites, slavery, northern colonies and southern colonies. No one had free speech. James Madison and some plural unnamed founders had to force both the North and the South to have excuses to bring up slavery and freedom outside of internationally monitored conversations and or the international companies, the criminal enterprises, the terrorists only capable of being. How about the name? How about the gangs of New York City or cities across the country? You think the campuses they went to through had no criminal foreign influences involved with that? The people who kill people in the cities and things like that? Time collusion slash S more less often in the suburbs, but it's connected. Same ones involved with multiple police departments and uses of pound lines with confessions manifest, not just to our own at countries A through Z. In other words, then people like, in other words, identity confessions designed to make in the furtherance of identity theft, fraud, slanders against every single person. You guys were supposed to have these principles understood when you were kids. You guys have nature debate containing quality aspects in nature that want to use words like principles, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions about needing to self-value. The books having been that value. See the books in the school book depository. You have a lot of people want to have nature debate about things, pretend serious about it, bring up the serious subject, but then they won't afford paid attention to even some such significant things. This preaching method keeps how people are going to go back and look about and speak about issues and instances. It's using even putting fake things recorded because the courts are a quality of fact shaming nature that prevents yelling, for example. While they are criminally foreign influence, while tactically delusions raw, fact shaming nature, quality aspects of nature, and collusion slash yes, that is evidential. They're not allowing us to use it as evidence, as our founders directed us to get free enough to use it. In other words, forgiveness is because even where you guys say, I'm losing your reports, you got these people keep saying, in other words, even when they're right, they're using the truth for a lie as collusion slash us with the high performing using us remotely, even when it is Israeli names. In other words, all our side, you guys are admitting you guys are collusion slash. Well, that's just the way it is, though. Well, follow mandated law rather than making some allegations. Focus on the predicate with conversations with me. That's multiple natures of organized crimes at the same time. That's multiple methods of it. I only saw a neighbor one time walk by me when I was in fifth grade, across the street from a Tom Perron. If you know if he still lives there, I believe it's called Cloverdale Circle. In other words, they planted these people that act until other people take picture of you, make it look like you know them. Increasingly, their roles intercity and next to Fox Connecticut News, with the Facebook pages, intercities and intercampuses with sexual medical offenders of kids. Fox News and WFSB has a bunch of people involved with instituted living with sexual and medical offenders of kids, with medical corruption with kids, identity theft, fraud, slanders. They're putting fake things in the databases because these are people collusions with the use from /s remotely of all ages and of all natures of investigations and of investigators, including increasingly intermilitary police forms and intelligence associated with the name Napolitano, as ones involved with predicate acts with campuses I went to that recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. People were putting influence to put fake things in databases. I didn't even have a class with Joe DeMoro. I never even saw John DeMoro on campus in my lifetime. He increasingly has collusion/s with people before and after I was in fifth grade, with my fifth grade teacher, who was also brought up increasingly with people as people involved with former director of the F.B.I, Robert Luskin, his co-defendants, their family members, and various natures of courts the same way with the same house/s involved with predicate acts with facts with them. Federal evidence is racketeering worse than war crimes, which is manifest at countries A through Z. Those are things demonstrably that our founders left us to communicate about. That's what black people's rights of eyes, replacing what nature communicates about. It's about predicate acts with facts method, making people replace what nature communicates and pretending that's debatable at the same time. They're still doing this with the differences of guilt. You guys, Judge Napolitano is the source of recorded, confessed, demonstrate, confirm. They have roles with the targeting of that buildings. Like, for example, this is a complete remote possession of, it's keeping A through Z fighting each other, hurting each other, killing each other, do anything, keep other things, others, or selves blamed rather than the breaching method that is a scientific value replaced right from the communications of James Madison declassified and from nature itself. In other words, forgiveness is so you guys won't allow forgiveness. If everyone just focus on the predicate acts with facts method/s. And for forgiveness, because we have to look at what, because there's a whole bunch of ways to discern it. The interbranch, the overt criminal enterprises, private ones, even when they're not in the same cases, even little kids' cases, there are victims advocates from Central Connecticut, from New Britain Superior Court, who have collusions with overt criminal enterprises, private ones. Then they start leaking it. In other words, there are legitimate roles with such, which there is no such thing as legitimate because A through Z, suit to ties, counters, exceptions. You guys came through criminally forward influence campuses that were from off them, hyper additionally, only capable of blaming other things, others, or selves, and shown how to by the breaching method that showed you guys how to speak for American history. You don't replace with James Madison how he and the other founders declassified. As nature shows us too, nobody had free speech. Everyone had to pretend otherwise they were sentenced. And the differences of guilt between the internationally forced monitored conversations, the overt criminal enterprises, the private ones, the international companies who were part with it. In other words, and who spoke honestly for New York City, who spoke on. In other words, then they're supposed to learn about. In other words, I don't want to go into what other people said about this. But in other words, if you pay attention, the prisons, interstates, they have recorded collusion/s with people with the campuses and with the databases, no. And increasingly with the networks and exceptions used consciously, remotely, criminally foreign influenced. Wethersfield Public Television and the community public television intercities like Rocky Hill too has collusion/s further. There's a Luigi Guerrera increasingly involved with people with foreign and domestic military and other and his educators. People from my campuses recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. He has collusions inter and intra cities with the educators of his family members too, and people planting evidence on my street. In other words, I don't know their names all yet. But just timed abuses of the kids sustained through the whole time they're in schools and between them and with names next to them. And there is a use/s of that recorded. A Mike Domains involved with sexual confessions and demonstrations and confirmations on Hangdog Lane with a Rick Cianfaglione involved with medical and sexual offenders of kids, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed him involved with it. He confirmed those names too. Brian Silver is one of the ones involved with and or as one of the prosecutors with kids involved, and with the kids of a Leahy family. There are men and women of a Leahy family with Hartford Hospital's triage, and their roles with multiple agencies, foreign and domestic military, leading up to the World Trade Center attack in it and since used remotely by a hyperforeign. Also with the guilt, pretending anyone spoke for our name too. That's right where they leak too, and where they'll demonstrate they are criminally foreign influence. They never spoke for America. In other words, he should fear God to be on in the database, pretended having had a face conversation with me and with the women and their family members, and they have their little kids on Facebook involved with them with all kinds of criminally foreign influence collusion slash s with Facebook personally and professionally with people from Wethersfield, Connecticut, involved directly and indirectly. Two, increasingly a Kerr family recorded capacity demonstrate confirmed with people in Old Wethersfield involved with a Christopher Walters, and who said also, and with a Ray Claw. They have people with the Charlie Bowes and with the buildings next to Fox Connecticut News. I never saw Ray Claw down there. I never hung around with Ray Claw. There were brief exceptions. Every single one side recorded their involvements with federal evidences crimes, identity theft, fraud, slander, sequence shifts, and with their educators, forced track, persuaded roles from off the campuses though. That's why my campus is my. That's why I never got suspended and everything like that. When there were people with fights and things like that, when the time when you come around the corner, they make it look like they know you. One time I did it was one one of those fights I was in like that was has to do with the corner of a street of a grammar school I went to, which has the networks that were planting evidences when the child abuser principal was brought up to me with worse recorded confessed demonstrated confirmed more names were involved with it. A police chief Centron also has a retired police chief Centron involved with 80 Carousel Drive with a Phil Colo and retired police another retired police chief and their family members and intimate ties. A whole bunch of people with the name Bobby male and tied to them, male and female, intercities with Central Connecticut State University intelligence involved also next to Central Connecticut State University on Covington Street and the other apartments and buildings near there. All sides of campuses, intercities, including sexually themed. And those people are involved too. I never had a response to the guy who reported the probation officer or tied to the probation officer. He said with the probation officer of Mike Oliver at around the time they were involved with the intercities timing where I was going to be, and next to Trinity College and next to CCSU at the same time because I was living next to CCSU but going to college at Trinity College. And these are increasingly people from UConn. And a Mark Violet is also next to Hartford Hospital in Hartford with intelligence next to it with very I don't know if he's Marines or what, but various intelligence with the military police. They've recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, have roles with people with South Korea, with my former principal when I was at the school as the principal child abuser, with the others involved further. One of the educators involved with WTNH and FBI confessed that Lance Cuddy's involved with it. And also the daughter of the principal when I went there, there's a Kevin Harris. And his family member has roles, putting fake ties. I never had a word of conversation in my life with him. He threw a punch at me one time. I just blocked it and gave him a little punch, and that was it. In other words, and then they made me go to then they made more confessions with that too, tied to which are nonverbal to make it look like we ever communicated with a Fred Grisette. A Fred Grisette is also one of the ones increasingly involved with probate court judges, with sexual medical offenders of kids, and with the John Maiano. And his father reported. I never met his father in my life. He reportedly used to work for Modern Pastry, and a Ray Cologne and a Tim O'Brien, and others have been identity theft, fraud, slanders to a Modern Pastry family. and to the Mazzucato family, but I don't know if it's with them. No, but has something to do with their roles with Walgreens too. And with the policing it from off of it though. See, it's always from off because it's been from off location slash S with no unwanted collusions, like for example, replacing black people's whites of eyes. Communications by nature. But you guys have self-value collusions with that. If someone tries to use that as evidence, where the evidence is replaced. Oh, where it is? Let me look it up on Google. No, there's nothing against Google. There's nothing against it. It's they have the wrong answers. In other words, our founders declassified. Our founders did not have free speech. We were not supposed to use the text as is and pretend it was free speech. We're supposed to understand there was a torture, extortion, slavery method and use of it. Collusion slash S too. There was a collusion slash S and with use slash S of it too. And then there was the value of everyone's as natures, as criminal insidious, and as natures of positive treatments, negative treatments, different treatments, instances, descriptions. Otherwise, that body was a sin. So increasingly, at and between campuses, they're putting and the differences between the guilt of the foreign families involved with it, the overt criminal enterprises, private ones, terrorists too. The terrorists, this terrorist breaching method, worse than just the terrorists. No, it needs people using words like extremism and radical, and torture, and legislation. People, you don't vote on black people. You don't vote on slavery. And pretend you could appreciate James Madison. So they have people like even the best people like Judge Napolitano is a good person, but really evil used for replacing why our founders communicated for us to understand that they were unnamed founders and we don't know who they were. They had to counter extort people at key locations and force everyone to help. Inside of more than 13 colonies, entrenched with even slavery rolls only permitted. Can't even afford the word native used legitimately, let alone Native American. You want to speak about markets, you guys don't care about, in other words, the bottoms. You already don't even care about science. The suburbs were designed to cause negative value, nature progressions, acts, and natures, and to make more and more. The only means to defend from that or to try to overcome it through attack. In other words, is to value criminally foreign influence means to cause positive value, nature progressions, acts, and natures. More and more. That's why even though we have more and more technology, more and more. The housing is getting worse than it was while they were being tortured, extorted, and slavery, stuck in a method that can be used remotely from abroad. Wouldn't be able to defend itself after. In other words, they're going to speak about defense. They don't have defense at countries A through Z. They have a phenomenon of what they inherited because of James Madison's plan and those plural founders. Probably Native American too. In other words, even if they weren't, Native Americans would enable that plan to work. That's why president / chief, whatever they say, that's what nature shows us too. I don't know where it came to be president / chief, but nature shows us that too. I know that story. James Madison and plural founders who didn't even have the security to let us know their names and directed us to understand that for the same reason /S. In other words, this knew that people were going to pretend they could speak for decorum. The British Superior Court has rape threats online with the principal, while there has rules that were forcing a principal child abuser as families like a Kerr family, has roles with child abusers, leaders of case years apart. There's an officer, Jerry Miller, involved with federal evidence crimes with them on Facebook and planting evidence on all sides of my house. There's a Mendez officer. I never had a word of conversation with him in my life. The older one, I think of a brother too. And they must have family with it. But they have roles with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and various natures of federal criminals involved with federal crimes next to each of the campuses I went to. They have roles with the first campus I ever went to in West Hartford, with the name Mendez next to it, too. How are you, Easy? So, in other words, the world is messed up because other things, others, ourselves, the breaching method keeps blamed. Even though James Madison and our plural founders told us to blame a breaching method for things like slavery, they have our founders framed for slavery, and they have the people attacking that property because that's what they were learned. So that even when they're improperly, it's because the chief they didn't. Oh, in other words, the people defending them as they're defending them as other than what they said for us to defend themselves, to define our founders plural as unnamed founders and as James Madison or as James Madison. But they directed us to the distinction because everyone else was extorted and counter extorted too. For all we know, they weren't a part of that. In other words, they were forced to help, even if they were president slash chief. George Washington directed us to be honest about his extortion, but no one will allow honesty, or would have brought up how and why he had to leave Connecticut in northern counties and southern counties, entrenched roles even with the breaching method entrenched only permitting collusion slash s with slavery. Therefore, with styles of logic, natures of logic, and subject to uses of names, and we're words, no one's going to have any security. There were laws against everything. There were laws against if you heard people speaking about things outside of internationally monitored conversation. Then off the records too. The gangs, they're not going to want it. The gangs of New York City. Look at your databases. See, this breaching method used databases before our founders did. But before our founders were born, before computers were. This breaching method used the identity of relativity slash hyperrelativity of nature through its system with the individual species body of individual bodies. All group differences demonstrated by itself, demonstrating itself generating those group differences, or it demonstrates we're using an abridged system. That's the value of having the Constitution unabridged. See, there are abridgments with readings of the law and statutes and precedents. The differences between the criminal foreign influences with the readings of the word of the law, the letter of the law, or the nature of it too. That difference of that was exploited too. The sequence shifts show it. So I've been begging because Wethersfield police faked conversations with me as a kid and as an adult, as New Britain Superior Court did. Increasingly, they have collusions also with District Court of Connecticut and Hartford courts, with people that have increasingly predicate acts against me, also faked for themselves. But the interbranch are refusing to get on paper legitimately. They forged and switched names when I was there, while they're sticking more fake collusion slash s with all natures of crime scenes. Also screening the other countries and using that for an excuse because they're demonstrably directed to hide things tied to where and how they have all these countries involved with them. And they're using that to hide other and plant fake motives still. This breaching method knew that nature would be demonstrating to countries A through Z, to peoples A through Z, countries A through Z of the human species body, that a breaching method is involved. So it keeps that hyperforeign breaching method blamed on through A through Z, keeps them blaming A through Z wrongly. It perfected having that and the counters to it used remotely too. That's why it's relative. That's where we can discern where and how there's no sophistication. By where and how black people's white guise is inseparable from any proper treatment of American history. In other words. And we haven't had one proper one. I believe it was in 1509 when Queen Mary, or it was earlier, maybe it was 1509, Queen Mary instituted, she published in English a book of Psalms. And the leader of the church, the Pope, put a death warrant on her head. Forgiveness is because if the Pope didn't do that, we wouldn't have memory of the Old Testament where the first part of it says, only defend right here, where the names of the people of the sciences will come together in the part that comes before it. And note that's the part before the part with the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And if Queen Mary didn't defend English, we wouldn't have English, remember. Because before English, there are proofs that English came from before Jesus, the time of Jesus Christ. But they know the names of the people of the sciences were shown more and more. They cannot afford to be discerned or to be made. Short words, the way the sciences, let alone the protraction. In other words, black pupils, whites of eyes, replacing with that communiques or rolls with it even is wrongdoing, and rolls with a predicate acts with facts method / S worse than war crimes. This manifests that country's A through Z. In other words, when you guys debate who is guilty or like that, you guys bring up the company Palantir is involved with the killing of those little girls, but you're leaving out the breaching method, and you're screening it, and you have collusions with the databases. And you have collusions with the breaching method, keeping us hurt. In other words, let's throw something in there because they have to add back at home. Right through the military, intermilitary, you have roles with psychiatry, with all kinds of criminally foreign influence, delusions too. You have delusions and criminally foreign influence, faction, nature, quality, aspects, nature, and roles with organized crimes, and being and having been used remotely there and at other locations / S. Also, they have a Perone family, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with foreign and domestic military, involved with planting evidence on my street. I never saw them on my street, never saw them on a campus in my life. And in other words, nor the people that they try to make a fake exception with. Something increasingly with a Mr. Hagenbar is involved with his kids and other kids, with identity theft, fraud, slander, people involved with sexual medical offenders of kids. I don't know. I'm not saying he is, but in other words, John Maano and others are involved with conversations with them too, with the places where they go. In other words, they're using the differences of they're playing games with the two speech class teachers I had, multi-front with people involved with Washington, D.C. and all along Route 175, increasingly all along Route 175 from Webb House. And the founding locations are people tied to a former Mayor Gold and a Debbie Gold. And there's another guy said illegal. I never saw him in my life. I only know what Debbie Gold tried to fake ties to me into sequence shifted, made me call her name because she was just yelling names at me. In other words, and after other people did, and then she told a teacher behind my back, and she told me to write a letter to show my parents, but I never even showed them because I put a stamp on it. In other words, with the name, but increasingly, people tied to a former Mayor Gold and other mayors and their conjunctions to them, like a Ruth, tied to another mayor, is increasingly involved with people involved with the World Trade Center attack, who are also intercultural and intracultural and interreligious spots, and roles with this, you either blame Israel or blame it, but you guys are dishonestly doing that because you were child abused, even the best of you, like Judge Napolitano. Fellow men did a lot. Please get me off of fake conversations with Fox News and their sources and their roles with the Facebook pages of the campuses with sexual and medical offenders of kids. More people involved with Joshua Schumack too, and a Joshua Stryker, intercities with the Facebook pages of the campuses with sexual and medical offenders of kids. And with the Wethersfield Police's Facebook page, further involved in the Brent Superior Courts. And I never saw him on my street in my life, Joshua Schumack. He's one of the ones involved with 3 spots at the end of the Berlin Turnpike, with people involved with confessions tied to the intelligence families near me. They have multiple police departments at the same time, inter and intra-cities. They use them remotely. They make confessions with their roles with the town lines too. In other words, all at once, because then if you bring up any one of those things individual, they won't let you speak about anything outside of courts that are criminally foreign. They're forcing quality fact-checking nature as collusion / S. The same house / S has the corrections offices and judicial offices hyper additionally collusion / S with them. On all sides of criminal and civil cases and depositions, they use that to put fake ties, fake nature ties to people. But the databases are still used remotely, criminally for animals, tactically delusion is raw, the way our founders directed us to understand. Who denies that is going to have inherent to, active to, and progressive to their logic, their nature of logic, demonstration slash S of the same. This is one of the reasons why Fox News won't follow mandated law and get on paper. They have interbranch forging and switching names, refusing to identify themselves legitimately. This is worse than extortion. Americans, get them on paper, one name and sequence. Please make sure Judge Napolitano hears this because there are proofs that they show him faked and changed digital evidences without used remotely. The identity of the names of the people, the science is still with the audacity to pretend integrity. Still, with the even though I could see a rap video with all that, like from the with the, especially the distant shots of cities, it's unfair. The suburbs were designed while they were being tortured, extorted, back to nature, enslaved, etc., etc. They wanted to build better then, before cars. In other words, for the suburbs, the breaching method only allowed cities to unfold that way. Many pray. And sickly distinctly, then we're going to need farmers. So sickly distinctly it will hurt farmers. Sickly distinctly it will help them at the same time. This is all sides of every issue and thing, where you guys make positive treatments, negative treatments. Right here online is where we force that quality of fact should be nature. And there's a difference between countries getting behind groupthink and all that with the legal syntax. Our countries getting behind a plan that feels like a game. Otherwise, it makes sense. See, we have it reversed. Anything that feels like a game is not right because it's reversed and pretending other. Oh, thank you, Easy. Okay, well, have a great night, Easy. And anybody, we can change the world this way. Many pray vaccines. I pray that Judge Napolitano will hear because in other words, Fox News, you can't just call them on the phone. They'll say, "Oh yeah," and then they have wire crime acts and methods of the phones distinctly from the like WFSB Channel 3 News, just fake transcripts of me and fake ties with fake conversations, ties to me with others and with doctors when I was a kid and as an adult. They have collusions with that. And with ones when there were quick basically the only thing I spoke about with them is I don't want to speak with them. In other words, they have ones I didn't even speak that with, and they pretended fake conversations with me. And they did this to others. They also put fake conversations between the patients and criminals at triages, like where they force people for mental evaluation. A bunch of people with that are involved with planting evidences on sides of houses with sexual and medical offenders of kids. They're using their locations to hide life progression. They make people raise their mouths and they lie about the behavior, speak about that truth, but they'll never permit a quality fact should be nature as collusions that where they should have resolutions when there's problems, like with people involved with weapons and poisons, and people have to raise their mouths. Then they put me to fake speaking at the place and yelling at the place, and they had another kid yelling it, and who was involved with the Parks and Recreation, and the Dillon family, who 3 times has collusion slash S with Hartford Hospital with putting fake things in my database in the database about me. People with their doctor, a Leahy family, a Lombardo family, people that I don't even know the guy's name, but a bunch of people tied to a John Mayall too, and a DeMauro family, an Iowa family, people, the houses and businesses next to Hartford Hospital, involved with a whole bunch of other countries too, involved with identity theft, fraud, slings, with the people that have been planting evidence on my street confessions too. That's why I didn't even respond to it. Robert Rodriguez is one of the ones all along Route 3 and all sides of a religious spot as people that were planting evidences in the past. Has something to do too with their roles with all the other countries, NASA, Russians. In other words, where they are fighting is used remotely by the hyperforeign, where they are trying to make negotiations that used remotely by the hyperforeign too. How it was is capable of doing that is how it was is capable of using all location slash S, and then further hyper additionally with the database relationships in ways we could discern, but no one will allow free speech. And then hyper additionally In other words, where the campuses and the names of the people of the sciences are manifest. This is one of the reasons at the beginning of the Old Testament it says only defend right here, where the names of the people of the sciences will come together in the part that comes before it. See, these are people that want to say, well, this group thinks this crazy thing. Each side has crazy things about religion because they're reading it out of sequence. This preaching method knew that people would be defending their difference as Muslim or as Christian. The Quran too comes to the part up front and says all that matters is someone's going to be honest about their use of the name Allah. And it even qualifies it by directing them not to pray in a mosque for the slightest reason. Doesn't say all that matters if they don't eat pork. In other words, same thing. So the beginning of the book, you never hear anyone say that because they can't afford to defend how they spoke about religion or reality. Tactically delusions are replacing God with nature. God is a word to understand nature's identity. People, thank you. Have a great night. Someone please tell Judge Napolitano, Fox News, CBS, and WTNH, I haven't tried to contact you yet. I've been trying to contact you guys through here. In other words, the FBI and CIA, if they don't hear this and react and why and how they can't react, that's going to be telling. Someone should appreciate that because you guys are obligated to not hide such. Oh, but that's not in our stories about. No, even when they have the WFSB has roles with non-criminal stories with people that are involved with them with the World Trade Center predicate acts and trying to cover it up with them. They have roles interstates with this. New England, New Yorkers, get them on paper when they watch me. Who disbelieves? New Yorkers, get Judge Napolitano file an anti-data law for Fox News and for CBS because they are also ones with the WTNH has people named O'Neill involved with the campuses intercities with more organized crimes with the kids and their roles with intelligence, wire crime acts and methods of whiting forensics and roles with their databases, various natures of organized crimes involved with the people who tied to databases. Then they're going to speak about the targeting with the databases. There are collusions before that. No, that's why we have sick things and people going on. All right, thank you. Good night, people. Good night, Easy.